Hello, 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 and welcome to the first episode of Mixed Media Reviews Season 3. My name is Kelsey, and today I'll be talking about a book trilogy. And this week's book is the Scholomance Trilogy by Naomi Novik. I really enjoyed Naomi Novik's previous books, Uprooted and Spinning Silver. A previous coworker of mine gave me Uprooted, complete with a nod-off cover from her cat. I really liked the fairy tale vibes and picked up Spinning Silver about a year later, and I really enjoyed that one as well. I also was reading Spinning Silver around the time that I was reading Bear and the Nightingale, so I was really into Russian mythology apparently at this point. But yeah, so I really enjoyed those, and when the Scholomance trilogy began making the rounds on the internet, I was a bit hesitant as the recent trend of YA author turned NA or new adult author with tons of spice has been all too prevalent recently. And like I've said before, I'm not really one for spice, though I didn't really think Uprooted or Spinning Silver were necessarily YA. I knew that this was supposed to be kind of her first attempt into YA, so I was a little bit nervous. And I didn't really remember anything from Uprooted or Spinning Silver to be, super adult or anything either, and of course they weren't YA. But after a fellow Redditor assuaged my fears, I decided to go ahead and dive in. I read the first two books in a weekend, and then the third over a few days since I was unable to read as much due to, lame work life getting in the way. The Scholomance trilogy consists of 3 books. That is, the first one is A Deadly Education, the second is The Last Graduate, and the final is The Golden Enclaves. I really liked the covers for all 3 books, but will for this part and the summary focus on A Deadly Education only. The book is black with gold lettering, a gold frame around the edge, and gold imagery in the middle, composed of a shining eye with phases of the moon encircling it, seeming to appear out of the pages of a book. So for the summary, I decided to pick up this little blurb instead of a more basic summary, if that makes sense. I found a summary that was kind of, instead written in her voice, which if you like this summary, then you may like the book, but if you don't like how the summary is written, then you probably won't like the book, kind of a thing. It is as follows. I decided that Orion Lake needed to die after the second time he saved my life. Everyone loves Orion Lake. Everyone else, that is. As far as I am concerned, he can keep his flashy combat magic to himself. I'm not joining his pack of adoring fans. I don't need help surviving the Scholomance, even if they do. Forget the hordes of monsters and cursed artifacts. I'm probably the most dangerous thing in the place. Just give me a chance and I'll level mountains and kill untold millions, make myself the Dark Queen of the world. At least, that's what the world expects. Most of the other students in here would be delighted if Orion killed me like one more evil thing that's crawled out of the drains. Sometimes I think they want me to turn into the evil witch they assume I am. The school certainly does. But the Scholomance isn't getting what it wants from me, and neither is Orion Lake. I may not be anyone's idea of the shining hero, but I'm going to make it out of this place alive, and I'm not going to slaughter thousands to do it either. Although, I'm giving serious consideration to just one. So I think that really sums up the tone of the book. But if you want a more actual kind of what the book is about summary, then it is this. Lesson 1 of the Scholomance. Learning has never been this deadly. A Deadly Education is set at Scholomance, which I think is how it's pronounced, a school for the magically gifted where failure means certain death, for real, until one girl, Elle, begins to unlock its many secrets. There are no teachers, no holidays, and no friendships, save strategic ones. Survival is more important than any letter grade, for the school won't allow its students to leave until they graduate, or die. The rules are deceptively simple. Don't walk the halls alone, and beware of the monsters who lurk everywhere. Elle is uniquely prepared for the school's dangers. She may be without allies, but she possesses a dark power strong enough to level mountains and wipe out millions. It would be easy enough for Elle to defeat the monsters that prowl the school. The problem? Her powerful dark magic might also kill all the other students. Like I said, I absolutely loved this trilogy so much. I'm not joking when I said I just devoured it. I read the first one in less than a day, started the second one in the same day, finished the second one the next day, and then almost finished the third one in that day, but I had to wait till a little bit later. So first up, I really did enjoy the writing style of this book. I can certainly see how it may not be for everyone, but for me, it was thoroughly enjoyable. Novik writes in Elle's voice, and at times she's even directly speaking to us. I love Elle's analytical mind, a mind that she has had to carefully craft in order to survive the school. While there wasn't always a ton of dialogue, to me, Novik was somehow able to not make it feel like just endless exposition, though I have seen people complain that it's a lot of info dumping. But perhaps it was the way in which Elle was constantly dissecting the environment around her, or the way she would address the reader to fill us in, that didn't make it feel very info dumpy to me. I think it was really well done. I've seen lots of people say that it's overly descriptive as well, or something like that, but that's, I think, literally the point. It's totally in line with Elle's character, and it really is her voice that is speaking to us. It's not a second narrator, it's not a toned down version of Elle, it is Elle speaking to us. And she has to notice every single thing in a space, or she'll get murdered by all the mouths that hide in the shadows. Mal is short for Maleficaria, which are like the evil creatures that kind of have taken over the school and are out in the real world even more. And they lurk in the shadows, or they lurk in air vents or pipes or wherever. They're just kind of always lurking just outside of your eyeballs. And sometimes maybe even in your eyeballs. You never know, really. And yeah, so to me, it felt more real hearing her describing everything and like going through everything. It was like we were seeing everything in real time with her. But again, I do understand that this writing style may not be for everyone, but for me, I think it was perfect. The second thing I loved probably the most is that at the ends of every single book, there are floor plans and axonometric sections and like diagrams, all of the school and of interior spaces, and I really, really loved just going through them. That is my favorite thing. I love a map, and I love, love, love when we see floor plans or sections or like spaces. I love it. Like Clue used to be like my favorite board game growing up because I love studying every single little room and seeing all the little details. And the same is true about books. I love when it's included. What else? So I thought Elle was a fantastic character and narrator. Again, she is very much flawed, and we know she is flawed, but I think Novik just did such a great job of creating this very strong, powerful voice that I think is very consistent and that we see kind of grow over the 3 books, and I was just loving it. And yeah, so I loved her arc throughout the 3 books while she kind of slowly began to open herself up to others. And I loved how BA she was in general. She's very strong. Her ability to, murder everything definitely came in handy from time to time. And I loved Elle. And I understand that people thought she was a little annoying and she wasn't very, lovable or likable. But I think that was very well done. And of course, she had this like evil aura around her that people kind of could pick up on, and they didn't like that, so they didn't really make friends with her, but she needed to make friends. So of course, she's not very likable necessarily because she's had to build this shell around her. And so I think she's a very flawed character, and it's a very realistic kind of point of view that she wouldn't be this happy-go-lucky, super nice, thinking of other character, because who could really be that in this place? And then if you add on top of it that she doesn't have friends, and that she kind of had to harden herself to make it out and survive on her own, I think it all makes really, really good sense. Is that how you would say that? It makes really good sense. It makes a lot of sense. Anyway, I also really liked Orion Lake. He was a great character, as well as Elle's closer allies, Leo, I think is how you say her name, and Adia. We get a little bit more insight onto them as Elle is slowly opening up. But again, we don't get a lot of information about them. Even like the closer allies are somewhat limited because that's Elle. That's her entire point of view is very limited, as she's learned, again, to close herself off and be as analytic as possible to make it out alive. But we do get to learn a little bit about Orion and Leo and Adia. So I do appreciate we get a little bit of insight, and that it's kind of in line with how much insight Elle would give us. I did see somebody compared Elle to Murderbot. It was on Goodreads, and they were like, well, if I had known that we got a Murderbot character, I would have read these books a lot faster or sooner, And I totally agree. She is very much like Murderbot, where Murderbot, we see everything through their lens, and it's not necessarily a very cohesive lens, but we do get little snippets here and there. And it makes sense, I think. I also really loved the magic system and how it was all based on language. Elle did a great job as someone who knows very little about languages and is trusting the author to speak the truth about them. But Elle did a great job about explaining how each language could be beneficial for certain things and why she would choose one language over another for certain spells. The school in general was also pretty cool. The environment in which basically the entire first two books kind of take place. They had like wall voids in their rooms where they would ask for like spells, and the void would spit things back out to them. And then there were like ever moving hallways and stairways, and things weren't always quite in the right place. And the school itself would like extend hallways or shorten things, and just kind of play with people a little bit. And it was supposed to like protect them, but then we find out it's not really quite protecting them really well, and all kinds of other things. But I really loved the way she like described the school and how the classrooms, and how there was always like a strategy to get from point A to point B kind of a thing. The ending to this series was also, I think, really, really good. I'm not going to spoil anything, but like I read the last line and was just like, whoa. It felt like everything in the entire series had been leading up to this one specific moment, and I really appreciated the kind of full circle, like, I don't know how to describe it. Like, I read the last line, like the last paragraph, and it just felt like the entire book, like I had closure, I guess. Like, not necessarily that everything was wrapped up in a neat little bow, but it just felt like everything that happened was built and designed for the ending, which I guess is how books are supposed to be. But it felt like Novik really made a great outline, like a solid, detailed outline, and covered all the points, and everything just in that last moment clicked together, and like you put the final puzzle piece into the puzzle, and you look back and you're like, yeah, that's a freaking puzzle, and it had all the pieces and they went together and it made sense. So yeah. There's apparently been some controversy around this book regarding racist items or racist undertones. To me, I didn't see any issues, and what I've seen people call out, I feel isn't really understanding the book. Like, I feel like they're taking things out of context and applying a worldview or a stereotype to it, and then getting angry about it, if that makes sense. Like, there's been claims that the other characters, which are of varying cultures and ethnicities, since everybody in the world basically goes to this one school for their protection, that they don't really have much backstory. But again, like, it's not because they're of specific races. Like, even the other white characters don't get these backstories. And again, that's because Elle doesn't care about anyone. Like, she only really cares about this handful of people, and even, like, in the beginning, and even then, she's really only using them as assets to help her when needed. Much like everyone else in the entire school, only she's more alone and has fewer to choose from. But the entire school alliances are built throughout every race, culture, nationality. They tend to kind of group based on, like, what city or what enclave they come from, whether it's a New York, New Jersey enclave, or one that's in Beijing, or one that's in Dubai. Like, there's a ton of different enclaves, and people kind of group to those ones because they want to get in favor and get in these, protective enclaves so that they don't die from all the mouths in the world. So alliances are kind of based on what you can provide. Why are you valuable that you can maybe get a spot in this enclave? Which is why those who are not as good or don't have like a special skill that they can offer are typically at the bottom of the rankings, and they're very much struggling to survive. They get picked off first. They may not have many friends, or as she points out, they don't shower as often because then you don't have someone to watch your back to shower, and people notice that you're a little stinkier than everyone, so therefore you probably don't have people to watch your back, so you're probably not very talented, so then you're not going to make new friends, and it's like a whole, cycle. Or they can be used as fodder for graduation day. So some of the lower rankings might join with a big group, but it's so that they can kind of be used as a shield come graduation day when they leave, and it's like a battle to get out, basically. And of course, in a world where magic is based on language, she's going to refer to people based on that language that they speak. Because it's important to know if you need someone who speaks Mandarin, I need a Mandarin speaker because that is something I'm not as good at, and I need that in my repertoire of spells, or someone who speaks an Arabic language, or someone who speaks an English language, Old English, or Norse, or, whatever language you need to know what they speak, because that is what's going to get the spells that you might need. And because to her, again, knowingly a flawed character, that is their value to her, not their personality, not, can they tell a joke, not anything about them except for what can they bring to the table. And typically the language that they know is what brings, is what they're going to be bringing to the table. And there are like other little things like, do they specialize in the artifacts, or do they specialize in certain types of spells? So there are other types of things that are of value to her, but first and foremost, it's the language. So her, saying, oh, that's the Mandarin speakers, and only referring to them as the Mandarin speakers isn't necessarily a racist thing. It's just that that's what she values, and that is something that is obviously seen, I think, throughout every character in the book. They kind of see themselves as, what can you be valued for? And as someone who does not have a strong foundation of friends, really she's looking for, what can you give to me and how can I get that from you? There's also another issue, which is, I think, understandably upsetting for some people, that Novik has since apologized for as well and explained that she added it after sensitivity readers went through it, and will make a point in the future to not edit after they've already gone over it. There's a passage where she mentions kids with dreadlocks, which I guess I have now learned is in and of itself a term that comes from colonizers to negatively describe a hairstyle, the lock hairstyle. But then she goes on to talk about how there's certain mouths that use the hair to hide in and lay eggs. And while I don't think that Novik was intentionally trying to harm the Black community with a bad stereotype, with a harmful stereotype, by including this, or was even trying to suggest in the novel that the lock style is inherently dirty, and that it's more susceptible because it's dirty or something like that, I do understand that that stereotype has been very harmful, and by including that in the story, it does, well intentional or not, play into that harmful belief. And obviously, when writing outside of their culture, authors should be aware of what they're writing and how it may affect people of that community. Leaving that bit out of the story wouldn't have changed what she was saying, and she was saying most girls have shorter hairstyles to limit the places to hide, and that washing their hair often was also an issue because of the mouths hiding in the shower pipes. So leaving that out would not have changed what she was trying to get across, but it would be leaving out something that stereotypes a hairstyle, and by extension those that wear their hairstyle, that they're, dirty or unclean, even though to have that hairstyle, the lock hairstyle, you'd have to have very clean hair. And if it's dirty, it does not work. But I've also seen Black YouTubers and Redditors talk about not being bothered at all, also referring to them as dreadlocks and not having a problem with that term, and taking it to mean that even a clean, protective hairstyle like locks weren't as safe to have, much like having long hair wasn't safe to have regardless of gender or hair type. Just that having something that was clumped together or clustered or thicker or denser or whatever could create more nooks and crannies for these mouths to hide in. So I can kind of see it on both sides, and I can understand why some people might be taken aback by that, and I can also understand why some had no issue at all with what she had said. Although I believe going forward they've decided to take that portion out or reword it in a way that wasn't as offensive. I don't even really remember that part, so I'm not sure if the books that I read had it or not. A lot of people have also really been hung up on a scene where Elle goes to a study space, and she gets some homework that is in Arabic, and explain that once you see a language, the school start giving you that language that you then will have to learn. And of course, not doing homework or falling behind has very bad consequences. So you try really hard not to see other languages because you don't want that extra homework and you don't want to have to learn a new language. And so when she gets that sheet of homework with Arabic, she sees a picture of a car on the side that is mowing down pedestrians and takes that to mean it's modern Arabic as opposed to an older version of Arabic. And lots of people think that she is playing to the stereotype of all Arabs being terrorists, but they're completely taking it all out of context. And I know what I said may sound really terrible at first, but let me explain. So I've seen lots of people say that they get that the car is more a reference to it being a modern language, like that's what clicked for her. She saw a car, she, then was like, okay, it must be modern. But they still think that she should have left out that it's mowing down pedestrians. But that's literally the point Elle has been making, not only in this first book, but in the entire trilogy, that the school only provides her with the most destructive magic for mass murdering or to do the most damage to a space. I know at one point she asked for a cleaning spell in her room from that void, and she got a book in, I think it was Old English, that took clean to mean completely destroyed. So instead of a simple cleaning spell for cleaning up, a spilled water or something like that, it was a huge fire to burn the whole room to the ground instead. So that kind of stuff. And so even in her homework, which was just simply her learning a language instead of, necessarily some spells, it wasn't going to be all sunshine and rainbows. Instead, it was going to showcase more death and despair, because that is what the school gives her, because that is what she's been destined to do, is destruction, right? And so Novik doesn't mention anything about the driver's race. It could have been something completely different. All we know is that, she knew it was Arabic from the writing, because she looked at the writing and said it was Arabic. And then she saw the car and realized, okay, it must be modern Arabic and not an older version of it. And then, she mentions the cheery, cartoonish illustrations, most notably a man in a car mowing down pedestrians, as a way to once again show that she never actually gets anything that's cheery or cartoonish in a fun way. It's also, it's always death and destruction that she gets. It's always horrible, horrible spells that she gets. And in no way has anything to do with it being specifically the Arabic language that has this. It's literally everything she's ever asked the school for. She picks up a book, it's going to be terrible spells. She gets a new language assignment, it's of course going to be saying terrible things and having terrible drawings on it. And the reason why she gets the language of Arabic as a worksheet is not for this, weird comment, the weird car thing to happen, but it's for a very specific and very valid reason that she gets Arabic, and I'm not going to say because that's a spoiler. And so I feel like so much of the criticism of these quote-unquote racist things in these books takes everything out of context and projects stereotypes and feelings onto them. There are also critiques about Elle being half Welsh and half Indian, but growing up, only with her Welsh mother, and somehow being too whitewashed, but also an Indian stereotype. I'm not sure how you can be upset about both at the same time. How is she both? Saying that she doesn't clean herself because apparently not washing is an Indian stereotype for some reason. But then they completely ignore that literally everybody in the entire school smells kind of bad and doesn't shower very often. That was a huge thing. It had nothing to do with her background being half Indian and everything to do with the fact that showers are not safe places to be. Especially for someone who doesn't really have friends. She can't really be there alone. And so it's like people picked certain things and then tried to connect them to racial stereotypes to try to call Novik out, but completely disregarded any context about what was happening. It almost feels like these are people who are trying to prove that you shouldn't try to be inclusive, that white people should not be writing non-white people, because everything it seems like she was doing, whether it was something that can be misconstrued as a stereotype or something that was her just being a normal person, was then somehow her being too like whitewashed. And so it just seemed like everything in the book you just couldn't really win. and I mean, I'm not trying to say that there aren't very, very, very valid criticisms to white authors depicting non-white characters, and that there isn't a lot of, nuance, and there isn't a lot of poorly written characters by white people, and that this isn't a discussion that doesn't need to happen in the book community, because obviously it does, and it doesn't mean that we shouldn't be looking to more black authors to write more black characters, or more Asian authors to write Asian characters, or, whatever the case may be. I 100% agree that those are valid arguments. I just think that the arguments that are surrounding this book are not very valid for all the reasons I have said. Anyway, the other critique that I have, and this may be a bit spoilery, and it's really the only thing that I was kind of put off about this book, and it's in the third book, so again, it's kind of spoilery. If you want to skip ahead, you may. I'm going to try to keep it general, but the relationship between Elle and Liesl in the third book, I think Liesl's inclusion in general in the third book was a little bit odd, like the amount of inclusion, since she wasn't really in the first two books as much. But what happens between them, like at the airport and stuff, is also a little bit out of nowhere. Like on one hand, I kind of get the inclusion of it, but on the other hand, it still felt kind of out of place and almost out of character for Elle. And, like usual, this isn't really a real critique that I have. But to me, it just felt like a little bit random within the overall story. I don't know if that makes sense. But yeah, that's all I got for that. For me, I loved these books. Maybe I was just really sucked into the dark academia vibes. I don't know. But like I said, I completely devoured them. And while I do understand, based on the criticism section, if you have any reservations about reading the books based on the specific things that I brought up, I think that you just have to read it to actually understand the context of the book, specifically the first part that I talked about, where people thought that there was this lack of, I guess, complete characters or well-rounded characters who are non-white characters, even though, like I said, that makes sense, because even the white characters, none of the characters are very well-rounded, because that is why you have a flawed, point of view. A flawed narrator, those narrators. Anyway, I do think for the comment about the locks, I can see how that might completely turn some people off in these books. In context, I don't think it felt malicious. It didn't seem like she was making a comment about the hairstyle, but more that she was finding out all the ways that things can kind of hide in unexpected and unlikely places. Even the most mundane thing could be dangerous. And that is what I took it as, and that is what I have seen many others take it as well. I've read, people's opinions on both sides, and it may just fall on you, the reader, to decide how to take it. But I genuinely love these books, and if you like fantasy and you don't mind a narrator directly speaking to you, then I say go for it. I think the only kind of valid criticism or reason why you may not like the books is, you're not into fantasy or YA, even though I think this was marketed more as new adult for the darker themes, or if you don't like the writing style, because I thought it was really good, but I could 100% see how others may not. And there you have it. Those are my thoughts on the Scholomance Trilogy by Naomi Novik. Thank you so much for joining me. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook at Mixed Media Reviews Podcast. Please leave me a comment to let me know if you agreed or if you have any suggestions. You can also find me anywhere you find your podcasts, probably. Please join me next week, where I will be reviewing a TV show, Vampire Academy. Also, I'm now on Tumblr. I mean, I've been on Tumblr for a little bit, but I'm there if you are a Tumblr person. Anyway, have a wonderful rest of the day. Bye!